Video number 5. So we have talked about basics, some physiological differences in males and females, touched up on nutrition. What I would like to find out now is, how do you set up a nutrition plan for a woman? Is it different than a man? What kind of numbers you're looking at? Are you looking at numbers? Do you take their lifestyle in account and things like that? What kind of issues someone might come across? And does it differ when you account for performance, aesthetics, and health? Or can you do something that is hybrid for all of them at once? Or maybe you do periodization. Like my preferred approach is do a few months of this, then next 6 months of different approach, and so on and so forth. So how would you suggest somebody to set up a nutrition plan? And let's say the goal is number 1, health, then aesthetics, and maybe performance as the last but not least, definitely.
First thing with a new client is we will have received blood work and we'll have gone over that, and just to make sure there's nothing red flag that we have to be hyper concerned of or need to address right away. So assuming that all things are relatively normal, good, healthy, etc., I absolutely take into consideration, the first thing I probably consider is the client's lifestyle, how busy they are, what are their outside stressors, work, family, social life, etc. Because I think a good coach should be able to design an appropriate training and nutritional protocol to cater to the client's life, not make the client have to flip their life upside down to comply to this program. So that's very important, and that's going to help me determine how many meals do I think is going to be needed throughout the day. Like, what's a realistic target? If they're super busy, they probably don't have time to eat 6 meals a day, and they don't need to. It's really going to come down to determining the most, I guess, wrinkle-free approach to their lifestyle and still achieve the goal. Now, how I determine the calories is going to depend entirely on the client and their current body composition and goal. If I have the ability to get my hands on the client, I'm going to do skin fold measurements and determine lean body mass. If I can't, and they can get some sort of measurement that I determine to be reliable, like a DEXA scan or something, I would use that. And then if I have their lean body mass, I'm going to use a formula known as the Katz-McArdle formula, which is going to be 9.79759 times their lean body mass plus 370. It's a weird equation, but that's the way it comes out. And that's going to right away determine their basal metabolic rate. So in theory, the calories they need at rest to maintain their current physique. That, to me, for a performance or body composition based goal, is the most accurate. But there are other formulas that you can use. You can use the BMI, 703 times body weight divided by height squared. But that becomes more and more inaccurate the more active and strength training adapted, physical adapted people they are. That becomes more and more inaccurate. That's a really good one-off equation for somebody who's sedentary, just never really been physical. It's what the doctor would use when you walk in. They've really kind of just generated that quick equation, pop you on a scale, and they get your BMI. That one will work in certain scenarios. And then if I don't have the ability to get lean body mass, I'll use what's known as the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, which is just another crazy equation: body weight times 10 plus height times 6.25 minus their age times 5 minus 161. So it's another fucked up equation, but it's what they've determined. They use that one pretty common in the military, the Navy and stuff, because it's very quick. They don't want to sit there and caliper everybody. They can just take your stats and get a pretty good ballpark idea of where your basal metabolic rate is as well. Once I have that sort of established, if I'm working with a client and the goal is long-term health and sustainability, and over time progressing towards a changed body composition, more muscle, less body fat, or both, then we really want to go nice and easy. We want to create habits that are sustainable, not interfering with life, and providing progress towards the goal. So if they don't give me a timeline that's tight, what I want to do with a female client is I want to get them onto that theoretical maintenance caloric intake and leave them there until I've seen 2 menstrual cycles. And from there, I have a very, very strong, dare I say, 100% certain idea of what their energy balance is going to be like. And from there, making an adjustment is really easy. One you have to consider, though, with clients is what their lifestyle is. If they have a desk job, their physical activity level is going to be different than if they're, say, a trainer or someone on their feet every day, a professional businesswoman that maybe is running from meeting to meeting to meeting all the time. They're going to have different physical activity levels that need to be incorporated. It's just a multiplier from that BMR number that we got from one of those equations.
When you go there, before you go through all the crazy numbers and whatnot, what is your opinion about doing something simply at home, in a sense of like dietary recall? Just set a diary and check what they're eating. Would that be a tool you could ever use with anyone, just to reflect on where they are at, if they are getting scared from getting all the numbers wrong?
Yeah, and that's fair. They often are. If the equations are something they're not interested or they don't have the time to do, I would simply just take body weight times 13 or 14 for a female. Body weight in pounds times 13 to 14. The food journal thing can work if you have an idea who this client is, but from my experience and in my demographic, the food journals just constantly show females that have been under eating for a long period of time. I don't want that to be our maintenance caloric intake, because it's going to be way undershot and they will have had adaptations that have occurred during that time that I want to get rid of. Yeah. So I don't put a lot of weight in the food journal with someone I don't know.
And after I think that's an important message to get out there, is that women, more often than not, are just driven into this fear of eating, and they have this belief that they need to eat less to look better. But sometimes it's more about eating good and eating for purpose. That will make the difference.
I 100% agree. Like, the body is, think of it like a machine. It needs a certain amount of fuel to be running at an optimal ability. And when you don't provide all the fuel, it just downregulates certain things that it doesn't deem crucial for survival. It doesn't care that much about your metabolism when it has to maintain your heart rate or your blood pressure or something that's more vital to life. So if there's a constant low fuel intake, the body's just compensating by downregulating or adapting things to make sure that you're still alive. Like, think of some of the systems on like dimmer switches. You know, the body just dims things a little bit because it's not crucial for survival at the time. Much like menstruation, you'll see oftentimes females get irregular menstrual cycles, and oftentimes it's because their energy intake is just too low. The body's not going to prioritize fertility and, you know, offspring if it doesn't think there's enough food to even provide the female with enough supply. So it's not going to, you know, promote pregnancies at that point.
Yeah, and they still might not look the way they want to as well.
No, and they probably won't, because unfortunately they'll get caught in this trap where they're constantly searching for the scale weight to move and disregarding the difference between fat mass and fat-free mass and just seeing the scale. That could be a trap, because if you are losing lean contractile tissue, i.e. muscle, your metabolic rate is slowing down, because it's your lean body mass that drives your metabolism. If that's slowing down because you're slowly losing muscle, you won't know that today or tomorrow or next year. You'll realize that when you're 5, 10 years later. If you look at like a 20-year-old female out of high school, university, whatever, if she's eating and, you know, doing the thing that you did when you were 20, look at her when she's 30, then look at her when she's 40. You will see usually a decline in body composition. And it's because over that time, lean contractile tissue is slowly atrophying. and the basal metabolic rate is slowly reducing. And if they're not compensating from their caloric intake, they'll slowly increase fat mass. And then over the course of time, years, they're just going to get to a body fat that becomes unhealthy or problematic.
So long story short, it might be worth taking your time to go through all these complex equations and determining what exactly you need, just because a dietary recall might not be the best approach, because your body might have gone through adaptations that you have forced it to have, just because of not necessarily the best beliefs that a lot of people put out there, which is calories in, calories out, you need to weigh less, you need to weigh a certain amount because you're such height, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the calories in, calories out, it's in the language, it's just too simplified. It does come down to energy in and energy out, but it's not a one-for-one equation, because how many calories you consume, there also has to be the consideration of how your body's metabolizing these. So it's not literally mathematical calorie in, calorie out equals this. It doesn't work that way, but it is, at the end of the day, energy in versus energy out. Is there a balance? Is there a surplus or a deficit? That is, at the end of the day, what has to happen based on your goal. I just find that the quick approaches with females that you see them getting, either conned into or thinking that's going to be the right approach, it's either giving them a quick fix or a complete false representation of what's truly going on. And they're they're usually going to be seeing some sort of rebound after the fact. And every time they repeat the same sort of 30-day challenge or transformation challenge, whatever they're doing from an extreme point of view, they're going to get a little bit worse on the rebound each time, because every time they did the extreme approach, they lost a little bit more lean tissue. And every time they restart, they're at a physiological different point each time, and it's slowly regressing. I think it's much better for a female to get the most amount of, I think it's kind of like, I consider this kind of like your allowance. I tell my clients, like, imagine you get $1,000 a day, and the $1,000 will be, say, calories. Would you rather get $1,000 or 2,000? Like, what would you rather have? If none of them cause you to gain body fat, what would you rather have? If you have 2,000 and you don't want to eat it all, by definition, you will eventually be losing weight, i.e. body fat or lean contractile tissue, depending on your training, but say body fat. But you also have that cushion. You could go out, have a date night, go out with the family, do whatever, and not exceed your $2,000 allowance. You're not going to put fat on. Where if you're stuck at 1,000 or whatever it is, you don't have that room for error. And you're going to get to the point where, because you're not going to sustain 1,000 calories day in, day out, you're going to have days where you just can't. And if your body's adapted to that, you're going to run the risk of, now, instead of you having that $2,000 sort of budget, you only have 1,000. It's a lot easier to get in debt. You still have certain bills that need to be paid. Protein has to go. It has to be there. If you don't have adequate protein, your lean contractile tissue just doesn't stand a chance, and it's going to waste away over time. So I think it's well worth the effort for a female to determine their theoretical maintenance calories and try to get the most of that, and be patient for 2 cycles, just to make sure you've seen the follicular and luteal phase effect on body weight, because it's not necessarily on body composition. And don't prematurely start cutting calories because you weight spiked. Like, just let 2 cycles go through, compare follicular to follicular and luteal to luteal, and see. And if you have a relatively stable body weight at that calculated maintenance, then you're at maintenance in theory. So if you know that 2,000 calories or 2,500 isn't going to cause fat gain, that should be the biggest relief ever, because you're probably not anywhere near 2,500 calories on a daily anyways. So you could now have 2,500 calories today on Monday, and maybe 2,000 Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and maybe 4,000 on Friday and Saturday. But at the end of the week, you're going to be even. But if you don't know what your ceiling is for your maintenance calories, you're almost at fear. You almost have fear of overeating any time, because you'll see a weight spike and then think, I just gained fat, and it just doesn't work that way.
I'm more interested about where do these numbers came from, because we know, hey, organs spend so many kilocalories per, and so on and so forth. So can you expand on that? Why are you looking into lean muscle tissue to be specific number to calculate calorie intake, and also how it correlates to, how much body fat they have? Why does that change how many calories you need? And why can't you just go on body weight alone?
Well, like I said earlier, you can go on body weight alone, and it's going to be probably just as good, I guess, in a way, if you are paying attention to all the other variables, because you are sort of guessing based on body weight. So you have to be patient to make sure that you're not being fooled by any false positive of a scale blip. The reason I prefer to use lean body mass from the calculations is because that is the driver of your basal metabolic rate. So if you have X amount of lean body mass on your body, it's not my opinion. These equations have been derived through research, and scientists have figured these out for like decades. They've been using these equations. So we know this. So it's just a more accurate way to determine things. But again, if you're just giving me, and I do this often, I do body weight times 14 for a female, for example, 13 or 14, depending. Somebody that's more obese, maybe a little less, maybe 11 or 12. Somebody that's super active, super lean, super muscular, maybe a little higher. But generally, body weight times 13, 14 is going to give me a ballpark. And I'm just going to take those calories and I'm going to run with them. And I'm going to wait to see, ideally, a couple menstrual cycles to just make sure all the scale blips are either hormonal related, environmentally related, or are we actually consuming too much and gaining body fat. But body fat accrual doesn't happen to a point where we can measure it overnight. It takes days and days to do this. So you can't assume a weight spike means you gain fat, because the amount of fat you can gain in a day, even if you tried, is grams, not pounds. And we don't have the technology with coaches to measure that unless you're going to go sit in a lab and get like biopsies done and stuff like that. You can't really measure that amount of fat mass was just gained. So to worry about it from a day to day is just stress that you don't need.
Yeah, especially when people come back from holiday and go, "Oh, I put on 12 pounds of fat." No, it didn't happen.
Yeah,
but it will happen if you carry on, if you don't stop.
Yes, and that's really important for female. I think that's why it's so important to establish a strong idea of where their maintenance calories theoretically are. Because if you can rest assured that whatever that happens to be, 2,000, 2,500, if you can rest assured that that's not causing fat gain, then you can't be gaining fat if you're not eating over that. And then from there, like depending on my clients, some of them are tracking macros, some of them are following meal plans, some of them use, my MyFitnessPal and different app trackers. It doesn't really matter how you track it. You just have to have an idea of what you're eating, and you have to have an idea of how much you can get away with until you start accumulating body fat.
So this is interesting for me. So you focus on body weight, body fat, some differences. Everyone needs to understand that. But once you understand your calorie intake, how do you split it up? What are the steps? What is the most important thing? And how you break it down into everything else?
To speed up your calorie intake?
No. So what is the next step after you have determined your calories? What are you looking into next? Because we know you can have 2,000 calories from ice cream and 2,000 calories from chicken.
Right.
The effects will be completely different.
Right. It's just like your budget with life. Like you get X amount of money to spend, you have certain bills you have to pay, whatever you have left over, you can go shopping, whatever. You have to have your protein target. You have to make that target every day.
So we'll be number one for you.
Absolutely number one. Absolutely number one is protein. And then after that, I would say fiber is probably the second most important. Fiber is going to come by the 80-20 rule that we've talked about in a few of these videos. If 80% of your food is coming from nutrient-dense, calorically poor foods, your fiber is taken care of. But in essence, you do want to have a fiber intake, probably 14, 15 grams per 1,000 calories is the range you want to be in. But once you have your protein target established, I would then determine your fat intake.
So talk to me about about protein. What would be your minimal, and does it change ever?
Yeah, it definitely changes. And the range of the protein's pretty broad. The RDA is probably different everywhere in the world, but the RDA around here is quite low, like maybe 0.6 grams per kilo or something like that, which is too low if you're looking to be active. And we're talking to clients that, or females that are looking to increase or improve body composition and looking to improve health and sustainability long term. So we're not looking for the bare bones minimum here. We want to make sure that we have adequate protein to provide the building blocks for progress. So I would say 0.7, 0.8 grams per pound is the minimum if you're going to be physically active. And I'm working with a demographic of females that is looking to be physically active. So we're shooting for 0.7, 0.8 grams per pound, bare bones minimum. But it's better, if you can, to determine your protein intake based on your lean body mass. Again, why those calculations are relevant. If you have that information, using lean body mass is usually a more accurate metric to add to your multipliers or your equations or whatever. And if I know your lean body mass, I'm looking for a gram per pound, up to 1.4, 1.5 grams per pound of lean body mass. That changes as female approach menopause, because as we get closer to menopause, insulin resistance starts to go up. We want to provide more protein as that happens. We also want to take away, in a sense, less calories to be put into carbohydrates if you're becoming more and more insulin resistant. But anywhere from 1 to 1.4 grams per pound of lean body mass is going to be plenty for everybody. And also, the more strength orientated their training is, the higher I want to go with that protein intake.
What about protein quality? What is there something to be said about that? And is there any specific number of amount of protein you would like them to hit every single meal, or does it not matter and just overall intake of the day is more important?
No, all those things are very important. You'll oftentimes hear that this is a complete protein, this is an incomplete protein. From the research that I'm aware of, all the proteins that we're eating, they're complete in terms of their amino acid profile. But the problem is that the higher quality proteins have adequate amounts of all the amino acids for human consumptions. Some of the lesser proteins, the amino acids are there, but they're not there in sufficient amounts to be beneficial for a human. So your protein quality is crucial. Animal proteins are going to be the best no matter what, obviously, because the amino acids are in plenty across the board. Obviously, there's vegans, and I work with some vegans and vegetarians that aren't going to eat that. That's perfectly fine. That just puts a little bit more work on how we determine what foods to be eating to make sure that we have all the amino acids in adequate amounts. And then, because protein is probably the biggest driver of the thermic effect of food, which is your body's metabolism working to digest the food you're eating, I like to see 0.3 grams per kilo as a minimum every time they eat. I don't like the idea of snacking with just an apple. I think you're better off to have a little bit of protein every time you eat, just for the additional benefit of increasing the thermic effect of food. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but again, because I'm working with professional females that are looking for long-term sustainability and progress, we want to have habits in play that are working behind the scenes that you're not seeing today, you're going to see in 10 years. So ensuring that the thermic effect of food is always high every time you eat, it's just giving you that much more of an advantage when it comes to your metabolism. So 0.3 grams per kilo minimum, there's not really a maximum. You can have all the protein you want at your sittings if you want. Research is all over the place with that, but I would say 2 is getting kind of close to being a problem. It might be fine depending on a lot of other things. But anywhere from 3 to 4 servings a day or more, you're completely okay. As long as 0.3 is the minimum and the maximum is whatever else is left to take in for the rest of the day, you're good. You can divide that however you want. I like to divide it a little bit strategically based on their training and their life, and where we are in terms of a periodized block of whatever. Sometimes I want to have more protein first thing in the morning. Sometimes I want to have more later at night when they're going to bed. Sometimes both. If I have a span of the day where there's no real physical activity coming, I'll minimize the protein there to that 0.3 grams per kilo or maybe slightly above. So I can put more around the activity or more towards bed or something like that.
So when you talk about 0.3 grams per kilo, that's per meal.
Yeah, every time you eat, that should be the minimum. Because you just want to make sure that there's some protein in place for the thermic effect of food, but you don't want to overdo every meal, because depending on your training and if you've, your anabolic window and, muscle protein synthesis and all these things, you don't want to be bombarding your body with protein at every single meal if it's not necessary, but you do need to have an adequate amount. Protein is also very satiating. So if I have somebody that's in an energy deficit because they're getting leaner, we want to make sure that they're satisfied with as many meals as they can be, so they're not threatened to break compliance and then eat something that would throw their balance off. So there's a lot of advantages to protein in that sense as well. And then plus, people like eating fats and carbs. So if you have too much of your calories into protein, you're not going to have as many left over for your fats and carbs. And that over time can be a compliance problem as well, because at the end of the day, there's going to be foods that people are craving here and there. And if you've got your nutrition set up strategically, you shouldn't really have to avoid any of them. There will be times, depending on your goal, where you might have to moderate the quantity, but there should never be a food that's just off the table because, it's a bad food. If your calories are set up right and you have the room, you can incorporate any of the foods you want and still make progress. It's just a matter of making sure that everything is in line first so you can have that wiggle room.
So you go from calories, you go through protein, you go through your fiber. What would be the next? And does it differ when you choose to have higher carbs compared to higher fat?
It definitely is going to differ, but my next macro setup is going to be fats. And I'm going to take the fat intake. I'm usually going to use a percentage of that total caloric intake that we calculated. And it's going to be anywhere from 20 to 40% of calories to fats. The more, the higher the body fat, maybe the blood work showed a higher A1C or insulin resistance, the higher the fat intake I'm going to shoot for. This is assuming that we're not aiming for a ketogenic diet, which some people want or have needed or whatever. So that specific diet on the on the side, 20 to 40% calories to fats. And then if they're enhanced or not, that kind of changes the equation as well. But basically, that's what we're going to do. And because that's a calorie, you took 20 to 40% of your calories, you have to put that into grams of fat. So that's a multiplier of 9, because there's 9 calories per gram of fat. And then I have my fat target. And what's left over after I've calculated protein, after I've calculated fats, what's left over is my carbs. And fiber is going to be in with the carbs. I don't calculate fiber separately. I just make sure that amongst my carb intake, I'm meeting my fiber goal, which is 14 to 15 grams per 1,000 calories. I think the RDA is around 26 grams, but I think it's more relevant to be based on your caloric intake, because if you are only eating 1,000 calories, trying to always get super hard fiber intakes can become a problem. And so that's it. Whatever left over goes to my carbs. And then from there, I'm going to look at the client goal. What are we trying to achieve? What training, if any, modalities are we using? The higher the intensity, the higher basically the effort needed, the more I want to start biasing carbs, and therefore maybe the less fat. So that 20 to 40% fat is a sort of a sliding scale based on quite a few things. The remainder is carbs. And then from there, I may start to juggle them back and forth. If I get to a point where carbs are a little bit on the lower side because the caloric intake itself is low, there's a threshold where I don't really want to be under. The research is a bit controversial because it's depending on so many things, but somewhere in around that 100 grams of carbs a day is the point where the body is almost, I don't want to say confused, it's never really confused, but it's almost on the fence. Am I adapting to a low carb, therefore I need to produce more ketone environment, or do I still have sufficient carbs coming in and sufficient glycogen coming in? So I don't like to hover at 100 or less grams of carbs. I either shoot under or intentionally shoot over, 10, 20 grams over or under that, just to make sure the body is not on the fence. That's a real niche sort of scenario. It's not super common, but it has come into play a few times. And then from there, I'm just going to start to move. If I have a CrossFitter or an MMA female, or just a female who just wants to be looking the part like the demographic we're speaking to, but we have to do more aerobic or anaerobic type activities because A, they want it, or B, that's required. I need to fuel that, and the preferred fuel there is going to be carbs. So I can't have a super high fat diet with a low carb intake if I'm doing high intensity training. It's going to cause a big problem down the road.
Are there any other things that needs to be taken into account when you're developing your own nutrition? So let's say, okay, I sat down, calculated my calories, calculated how many protein I need, how many protein I'm going to have per meal, depending on how many meals I'm going to have per day. Then I get my fat sorted, got my carbs sorted. What else do I need to look into in a sense of that makes this diet complete and actually work for me? Maybe are there some hydration things? We talked about protein quality. How about carb quality or fat quality? Is there some kind of foods that you find would work better? And is there a place for a supplement for a nutrition plan that is just your starting point for you to start change? Or would supplements be something that you might incorporate only later on when things get more specific?
That's a good question. I actually wrote a diet book, setting up the diet, and I go into that a little bit more in detail. But the fat profile that you're consuming is important for long-term health. Basically, you want to get a third of your fats from polyunsaturated, a third of your fats from monounsaturated, and a third of your fats from saturated fats. So to make that super simple, if your protein sources are predominantly animal proteins, meat, dairy, etc., eggs, kind of things, your saturated fats are automatically taken care of. You don't need to overthink these values. You just need to have a few strategies in play. So if your protein intake is predominantly how we mentioned it, your saturated fats are good. From there, then, the remaining fats, you want to have a little bit of fatty fish in your diet. If you don't eat fatty fish, you need to supplement essential fatty acids because you need that EPA and THA. And then the rest of your fats can come from monos like olive products, nut butters, seeds, etc. So you don't have to sit down and measure a third, a third, a third. You just have to kind of think of the concept. Animal proteins takes care of my saturated, some fatty fish takes care of my polyunsaturated, nuts, olives, olive product, olive oil, etc. That takes care of everything else. My fats are good. That's it. It's that easy. And they don't have to overthink it. The carbs, that becomes a little bit more specific, but that's more based on insulin resistance. If I have a diabetic, I want to avoid not just high glycemic, but more high glycemic load foods, not glycemic index. So I'm going to probably promote.
Give me an example of high glycemic load food.
So the glycemic load is going to be basically your insulin response over time to the whole of the diet versus just the immediate response to a specific food. So like you could have a sugary food that is a very high glycemic index and spikes it. But if you ate that with a bunch of other things, like say you had a cupcake with salmon or something like that, I don't know, that's not a combination that you might do, but basically if you had other foods with it that slowed that insulin response down, that's measuring the glycemic load. That's more relevant for a diabetic than the glycemic index. But regardless, if I have a diabetic, I'm not going to be encouraging a lot of high processed, high sugary foods. I'm not even going to promote a lot of fruits, but more vegetables, sweet potatoes, things like that. But if you don't have diabetes or you're not a pre-diabetic, you don't even need to be concerned about that stuff, especially if you're following that 80%, wholesome foods, 20%, junk, you're perfectly fine. And even with fruit, because it's going to be a carb, I like to give fruit in the same sort of scenario I gave fiber. If I'm going to ask you to get 14 to 15 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories, I want you to have a piece of fruit for every 1,000 calories. So if you have a 2,000 calorie day, 2 pieces of fruit, that could be a banana, an apple, an orange, a cup of berries, a cup of strawberries, a cup of grapes, whatever. But basically that would be a piece. I would say 1 piece of fruit for every 1,000 calories. And again, you're covered. And these dietary strategies are going to be more than enough for any goal for anybody, assuming there's no specific medical condition or health issue that we have to deal with right off the bat, which the blood test would have determined. And in general, that's just not the case. In general, you just want to get this strong foundation put in play and ride it for probably a couple months, just because I want to see 2 menstrual cycles. And from there, if all that is in play, and we haven't seen any fat gain, and we won't, if it's done properly, you won't see any fat gain, then you now have pretty much a bulletproof idea of how many calories can you eat in a day without gaining body fat, and a strong understanding or comfort in knowing that the foods you're eating are taking care of everything that you need to be worried about.
Yeah, this is very thorough, and I think people need to understand that this information is for weight maintenance.
Yes.
Not gaining or losing or anything. This is most likely very important as well for you to understand that if this is more food, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to gain any weight, but it will probably fix your health and ability to digest, absorb, and deal with the food in a manner that your body actually should at your size at moment.
Absolutely. Now, you will probably see a weight spike. Just the overall, depending on how you've been eating in the past, but if you actually are eating more food, you will weigh more just from the food mass alone. The scale is just measuring mass, but you will not be gaining body fat if it's done properly. And then the thing that females will notice, and I see this every single time, is the first thing they're going to notice is energy. Energy is changing for the better. That's
more energy, more calories burned.
That's right. That's a huge win. It's not talked about because it's not sexy and cool and trendy, and you can't see it on the scale, but that is super relevant. That's just telling you, your body's telling you, like, I'm feeling good. This is what I want you to be. Keep me here for a minute. Like, let me sort out all the shit and keep me here. And then I'll be ready to work for you. And then from there, you adjust. If we want to lose body fat, we create an energy deficit. We can do that by increasing our energy output. We can do that by decreasing our caloric intake, or a combination of both. And from there, you kind of just look at the client, look at the goal, the lifestyle, the compliance, and then determine what's the best way. If maintenance calories is proven to be difficult for a female to get in, which happens, they're probably looking to reduce some of the food they're eating. So that's a simple tweak. You reduce a little bit of calories, and all of a sudden you're losing body fat, and you're not starving. You're actually probably quite satisfied because you may have been, full during the maintenance phase. Or if they want to be doing more activity, because some females want to be doing more, then we just increase that. Or, like I said, a combination of both. And the deficit is just going to literally be determined by what they want. How quickly do they want it? If we are looking for the long-term sustainability thing, we don't want to be aggressive. We want to just coax the body along, let body fat slowly come off. As you're building lean contractile tissue, you will establish these habits that you're not even realizing it. And before you know it, your lifestyle is giving you the progress you've been looking for, and it won't stop. In fact, all of my clients that continue, not necessarily as a client, but continue doing what we've learned together, or what I've asked, none of them have regressed. And they just won't, because it's their habits now. It's their lifestyle that is in play, that's giving them progress. I have a female client right now. She's a professional. She's very busy. She is leaner now than she was 4 weeks out from a competition she did 7 years ago. She's leaner now and not in prep. She's just doing her life. She's working, not looking to be on stage, and she looks 10 times better now than when she was actually prepping for competitions.
And
It's
that's,
just because
I think it's something great to highlight is that you don't necessarily need to keep cutting your calories, because you cut your calories a little bit, increase your intensity of workouts and whatnot. And then at one point that even if you bring your calories back in, now it's still calorie deficit with more food, because you have more contractile tissue, you're stronger, faster, more athletic, you move more, and you end up eating maybe double the amount of food you were eating a year ago, and you are still making progress in terms of losing body fat.
100%. And what that is doing to you is just giving you, it's like you got this giant raise and you don't need this money. So now you just have it. You're just like, oh, I can just go and eat whatever I want. It doesn't matter. I can go and binge on 3 date nights or family vacations or whatever in a row. It won't matter, because you've created such a strong physiological state of body composition that's much more in your favor, that your ability to gain fat would take effort, and your habits are counterintuitive to that effort. Like, you just wouldn't gain the fat. You'd have to actually try it, and no one's trying to do that. They're trying to lose it. But if they set it up properly, they will lose it and it won't come back on.
And this is something that I often get kind of looked at when I go on travels, and people go, how can you eat all this and look like you do? I'm like, I only eat like this when I'm with you. That's 2-3 days out of 3 months until I see you again, because I've trained my body to be this efficient with all the food I put into it. And I can get away with much more than anyone else. Whereas most of the people, they just try to starve all year round to look a certain specific way, not understanding that they are actually holding themselves back from making great leaps in their progress had they nourished their body properly.
I think not only are they holding themselves back, I think they're actually regressing, because they're going to be starving themselves for however long. And when they go off, because they will, because you just can't sustain that, that will actually be detrimental, because they will have gone through so many adaptations over the months or years that they've been eating that way, that they don't have that capacity. That metabolic capacity is just not where it could have been. And now it's easier to gain body fat. If you've adapted your body to be maintenance at 1,000 calories, that means when you eat 1,200, by definition, you're in a caloric surplus. Caloric surplus means weight gain. So if you are going to start gaining weight and it becomes adipose tissue, you're just going to spiral downhill.
Yeah. And sometimes you will gain adipose tissue because you haven't moved much and you haven't trained your body to be focused on gaining lean muscle instead of just gaining weight.
For sure. And there also needs to be a certain amount of body fat for females' health, especially the reproductive health. But I don't know of a female that is at that level of body fat where they're still healthy, that doesn't like how they look. Like, it's not like you have to have too much body fat to have healthy reproductive system and sex hormones. It doesn't take a high amount of body fat, but it does have to have some. Despite what people may see or hear, the level of leanness you see on a bikini stage can't be sustained long term. Drugs, which are used all the time, help them sustain it longer, but for long-term hormone health and overall longevity and overall health in general, they can't maintain that level of leanness. If you're not taking some of the performance-enhancing drugs you can't maintain that anyways. But the level of body fat that's needed to maintain reproductive health and sex hormones and stuff is not at all high. It can be sub 20, no problem at all. And females love the way they look at that level. So there has to be an understanding that some body fat needs to be there. Your body thrives there. But losing it doesn't need to be hard. And gaining it, if your habits are in place, is actually quite difficult.
And it brings me back to understanding that this should never be a quick fix.
No.
If you're trying to look good a certain way to just go on a holiday and then just forget about it, this will be more detrimental than not trying to do it at all. So, and let me just try to summarize everything. So if somebody is trying to set up their nutrition plan, you first would tell them to pick one of the equations for calorie intake that you can
If it
probably
was somebody,
Google it.
sorry to cut you off. If it was somebody that was just looking to ballpark this right away, I probably wouldn't even bother with an equation. If they like doing the math, sure, the equations are online, you can get them anywhere. But literally, I just take body weight times 13, 14, and that's maintenance calories. No more, nothing else is needed. Just take that and run with it.
So
But if
going
I'm
from
working with
there
somebody,
would be your protein intake then, breaking it down into 1 to 1.4 grams per pound per kilo.
per lean pound of
Per
body
lean
mass.
body mass, yeah, and then break it down in meals per day, depending on how many meals they want to eat.
Yep.
Then going from there, take 20 to 30% of those calories, and that's your allocated fat allowance. And then
20 to 40. Yep.
Then whatever is left at the end is your carb intake.
Yep.
And main focus should predominantly be on whole foods, and maybe leave your supplements out. And most likely you're not going to need them anytime soon.
The supplements, I think we can probably do a whole video on supplements, but right off the bat, you can't generalize a supplement for everybody, because a supplement literally is supplementing what is missing in your diet. So if your diet has been shit for so long, who knows?
If your diet is missing calories, then there's
you're gonna have deficiencies. But the blood work would have showed that. And then so what the blood work would show what might need to be supplemented in addition to food, and it might not. In general, somebody said to me, if you had to recommend a supplement that's relatively good for everybody, what would it be? I would say vitamin D and an essential fatty acid. Yeah. From there, it becomes very, very specific. I mean, magnesium, zinc, these things.
And I think that's something we can talk about in follow-up videos. So what I think about in supplement terms is you probably don't need carb drinks and protein shakes or anything like that if you just want to have great results.
No, you definitely not. That would become very niche and very performance specific driven. The females are just looking good, feeling good, and doing that for a long time. They don't need to get that specific. Don't waste your calories on liquid carbs. Like eat food.
Yeah, go get a cake.
Yeah.
No, appreciate your time, Scott. This has been really good, and something that anyone can implement immediately. And maybe in some follow-up videos, we'll touch up on supplements specifically as well. But we have some topics lined up for next few videos. It might be a while until we get to supplements. So appreciate your time, and
my pleasure.
I'll speak to you next time.
All right, thank you.